Some grief never fades. It just finds new ways to express itself. Simon Cowell had witnessed every kind of heartbreak on the Got Talent stage, but nothing could have prepared him for the 72-year-old woman who walked onto the stage that autumn evening, carrying herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to live with unbearable loss. Her name was Elizabeth Morgan, and she moved with the careful precision of age, each step deliberate and measured. She wore a navy blue dress with a small silver pin on her lapel, military insignia that caught the stage lights as she positioned herself at center stage. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her hands, weathered by 7 decades of life, trembled slightly as she gripped a folded piece of paper. The audience applauded politely, but there was something in Elizabeth's bearing that commanded a different kind of attention. She didn't smile or wave. She simply stood there, looking out at the crowd with eyes that held depths of sorrow that made the theater feel suddenly smaller, more intimate. Simon sat at the judges' table, his usual confident posture immediately shifting. 20 years of experience had taught him to recognize when someone was carrying more than just performance nerves. This woman was carrying something much heavier. The host approached with his customary warmth, but even he seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. "Welcome to Britain's Got Talent. Please tell us your name." "Elizabeth Morgan," she said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "I'm from Wales, from a little village called Llanfairpwll." "And what brings you here tonight, Elizabeth?" Elizabeth's fingers tightened around the piece of paper she held. When she spoke, her voice remained controlled, but there was an undercurrent of pain so profound that it seemed to fill the theater. "I'm here for my son," she said simply. "His name was David, Lance Corporal David Morgan. He was killed in Afghanistan 4 years ago. He was 24 years old." The audience fell silent immediately. At the judges' table, Simon's arms uncrossed, and he leaned forward, his full attention focused on the woman standing alone under the bright lights. "David always said I had a beautiful voice," Elizabeth continued, her throat tightening slightly. "He used to ask me to sing to him when he was little, especially when he had nightmares. Even when he got older, when he'd come home on leave, he'd still ask me to sing his favorite song." She unfolded the paper in her hands, revealing what appeared to be a letter, the edges worn from repeated handling. "This is the last letter he sent me before he died. In it, he asked me to promise him something. He said if anything ever happened to him, he wanted me to sing our song one more time, but not just in my kitchen or at his grave. He wanted the whole world to hear it, so they'd know who he was, what kind of person he was." One of the other judges, a woman, brought her hand to her mouth, tears already visible in her eyes. The theater had become so quiet that the sound of someone shifting in their seat seemed to echo. "What will you be singing for us tonight?" the host asked gently. "Danny Boy," Elizabeth replied, her voice wavering for the first time. It was his favorite. "I've sung it at his grave every week for 4 years, but tonight I'm keeping my promise to him." She looked directly into one of the cameras, as if speaking to someone far away. "This is for you, my darling boy. Mummy's kept her word." Simon stood up slowly from his chair. Not dramatically, not for show, but with the quiet understanding that what was about to happen required him to be present in a different way. He walked around the judges' table but remained at the edge of the stage, simply waiting. Elizabeth closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was something different there. The grief was still present, but alongside it was a fierce determination, a mother's love that death couldn't diminish. The backing track began softly, the haunting melody of Danny Boy filling the theater. Elizabeth's voice, when it came, was pure and clear despite her age. She sang about valleys calling, about summer's end, about promises that transcend death itself. But this wasn't just a performance. This was a mother speaking to her child across the void between life and death. Every word was infused with years of love, years of pride, years of missing someone so deeply that breathing became an act of will. Oh, Danny Boy, the pipes are calling, from glen to glen and down the mountainside. The audience was transfixed. People sat motionless, many with tears streaming down their faces, as Elizabeth's voice carried them into the heart of a mother's love. She sang about someone who was gone but never forgotten, about love that survives even the ultimate separation. Simon remained perfectly still, watching Elizabeth with an expression of profound respect. This wasn't about judging talent. This was about witnessing something sacred, something that belonged in the space between human hearts, rather than on a television stage. But come ye back when summer's in the meadow, or when the valley's hushed and white with snow. Elizabeth's voice grew stronger as she moved through the verses, as if David's spirit was giving her strength. She sang about waiting, about hoping, about the promise that love makes to transcend even death. Her hands were steady now, the trembling replaced by the sure movement of someone delivering a message of ultimate importance. The other judges were crying openly. In the audience, there wasn't a dry eye to be found. This was more than entertainment. It was a communion with grief transformed into something beautiful, something that honored both loss and love. "'Tis I'll be here in sunshine or in shadow, oh Danny Boy, oh Danny Boy. I love you so." As Elizabeth sang the final lines, her voice broke slightly, not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of emotion. She was saying goodbye and hello at the same time, keeping a promise and letting go, honoring her son's memory while finally allowing herself to share her grief with the world. The song ended, and for a moment, the theater remained in complete silence. Elizabeth stood with her head bowed, the letter still clutched in her hands, tears finally flowing freely down her cheeks. Then Simon began to applaud, not the quick professional clapping of a judge, but the slow, respectful applause of someone honoring something greater than entertainment. The other judges joined him, then the audience, until the entire theater was on its feet in the longest, most reverent standing ovation in the show's history. Simon walked onto the stage, approaching Elizabeth with the kind of careful respect usually reserved for sacred spaces. When he reached her, he stopped a few feet away and spoke in a voice thick with emotion. "Elizabeth," he said, "I need you to know something. David was right. You do have a beautiful voice. But more than that, you've just shown everyone watching what real love looks like, what a mother's love can accomplish." Elizabeth looked up at him through her tears, still clutching David's letter. "He would have been so proud," Simon continued, "not just of your voice, but of your courage, of the way you've honored his memory, of the promise you kept." He turned to look out at the audience, then back at Elizabeth. "Some performances are about talent. Some are about entertainment. But what you've just done, that's about love. Pure, eternal, unbreakable love." Without hesitation, Simon walked to the golden buzzer and placed his hand on it. "This is for David," he said, "and for every mother who has ever lost a child but never stopped loving them." He pressed the golden buzzer. Golden confetti exploded from the ceiling, The lights turned gold, and the music played, but the atmosphere wasn't celebratory in the traditional sense. It felt like a benediction, a blessing, a recognition of love that survives everything. Elizabeth collapsed into the chair that someone had brought for her, overwhelmed by emotion. Simon knelt beside her, speaking quietly, away from the microphones, offering comfort that the cameras couldn't capture. When the celebration finally quieted, Elizabeth stood once more. She looked out at the audience, then directly into the camera again. "Thank you, David," she whispered. "Mummy kept her promise. The whole world heard our song." Later, after the cameras stopped rolling, Elizabeth stayed in the theater for over an hour, speaking with audience members who had lost children of their own. Simon arranged for professional grief counselors to be available, understanding that Elizabeth's performance had opened wounds for many people. Before she left, Simon gave Elizabeth his personal contact information. "David's memory will live on because of what you did tonight," he told her. "But you've also given something to every parent watching. You've shown them that love doesn't end when life does." Elizabeth's audition aired 3 weeks later and became the most watched Got Talent moment in the show's history. But more importantly, it started a conversation about grief, about honoring those we've lost, about the different ways love expresses itself. Elizabeth established a foundation in David's name to support military families dealing with loss. She continued to sing, not for fame or recognition, but because she had discovered that her voice could carry comfort to others walking similar paths of grief. And every week, she still visited David's grave, but now she no longer sang alone. Families from across Wales would join her, sharing songs for their own lost loved ones, creating a community of grief transformed into collective healing. Because that night on the Got Talent stage, Elizabeth Morgan didn't just keep a promise to her son. She showed the world that a mother's love is the strongest force in the universe, capable of turning pain into beauty, loss into legacy, and grief into a gift that helps others heal. That's not television. That's the human heart in its most powerful form, proving that some promises are so sacred they can bridge the gap between life and death, between one broken heart and another, between a mother's love and the eternal memory of a son who will never truly be gone.